On September 18, 1961, UN Secretary-General
Dag Hammarskjöld
plane crashed in the African wilderness, killing the Secretary-General and 15 of his closest associates, officially attributed to pilot error. But many found the timing of his death suspicious and suspected foul play. The UN Secretary-General had made some of the major powers in the world very upset by being an active leader and challenging their influence and domains in Africa. He wanted Africans to rule Africa and give them control over their own resources, including the minerals needed to create nuclear bombs, which all the nuclear powers relied on. There were many who would like to see his demise. Even the director of the CIA, Alan Dulles, publicly said that Hammarskjöld had become a problem. So, was it an accident, or was Dag Hammarskjöld killed by powerful forces? This is Mystery History with Magnus. But before we begin, please like and subscribe. It really helps the channel a lot, and blah, blah, blah. Let's get to it. In the middle of the Cold War, Dag Hammarskjöld was elected Secretary-General of the UN, without him even being aware or asked if he wanted the position. He was what the superpowers hoped to be, a secretary that would be focused on administrable issues and refrain from political disruptions, just like his Norwegian predecessor Trive Lee had done. With the Soviet representative Valerian Zorin calling Hammarskjöld harmless, something that surprised the Western powers, which also supported Hammarskjöld. The only nation of the permanent members of the UN Security Council to refrain from voting for him was China. The superpowers thought they now had gotten a puppet that would do their bidding. Boy, were they wrong. Because Dag Hammarskjöld became a very active and involved general secretary, and not an inactive puppet that the Soviets and NATO had believed he would be. He tried to improve the relationship between Israel and the Arab states. He negotiated the release of 11 U.S. pilots from Korea, and he intervened in the Suez Crisis in 1956. But it was in Africa where Hammarskjöld would have the biggest impact. In the 50s and 60s, several African countries became independent and left their colonial rulers. Both superpowers, plus Britain and France, fought to control and influence the continent, which is not only strategic important, but also rich in minerals and natural resources. This was at the height of the Cold War, and Congo was absolutely key to uranium and cobalt, which is used in nuclear weapons. Hammarskjöld had a different agenda and wanted these African countries to be independent and control their own resources, becoming a threat not only to the two superpowers, but also the European countries that saw their colonies threatened. In 1960, the newly independent Congo asked the UN to aid and defuse the Congo Crisis. Dag Hammarskjöld wanted to send a UN intervention force, something the Soviets were strongly against. Nevertheless, 20,000 UN soldiers were sent to restore order, but Hammarskjöld's refusal to place the troops under the control of Lumumba's constitutional elected government was something the Soviets didn't like, and they now turned against him. Congo had been under the brutal rule of Leopold of Belgium, where almost half the population died or where their arms or legs would be decapitated as a result of the Belgian tyranny. Congo's strategic placement in Africa made it very important, and the US, England, France, the Belgians, and the Soviets all had agents and spies working there. However, Hammarskjöld was a principled man and stood up for the Congolese. The conflict now made the rich white people in Congo, mostly Belgians, flee to Katanga, which was the most mineral-rich province in Congo and seceded with the backing of Belgium, and was now at civil war with the rest of the country. Shortly after this, Lumumba was killed in a Western-backed coup, making the situation even tenser. According to an interview with a former Belgian Special Forces soldier, Lumumba was executed and his teeth was pulled out as souvenirs, with the man proudly showing them off to the journalist. His reasoning for this was that Lumumba had insulted the Belgian king. On the night of the crash, the Secretary-General knew he was a targeted man. He was surrounded on all sides and understood that he was in danger. Spies, mercenaries, white supremacists, All were deeply against his plans, and there was a hostile government in neighboring Rhodesia. He therefore was flying with false flight plans and planned to contact the tower when they came, circle around again, and then land. But after they had circled around and contacted the tower, the plane suddenly disappeared. Dag Hammarskjöld and 15 people of his closest staff were killed in the crash. And the first hint that this may not have been an accident came when an ace of spades card was found on Hammarskjöld's head. Who placed it there, no one knows. During the Vietnam War, the ace of spades was used as a tool of psychological warfare, as it was common practice by U.S. soldiers to leave the ace card on the bodies of killed Vietnamese. One of the passengers on board survived for several hours before he died and said there had been an explosion, while other witnesses saw a plane in the sky, but none of these were taken seriously. The day after the crash, former U.S. President Harry Truman publicly said that he thought Hammarskjöld had been killed, without being more specific than that. This was quite astonishing, since Truman was a close confidant of President Kennedy at the time, and it's therefore plausible that he knew something the rest of the world didn't know. Many people did not believe the official story. It was too convenient, and there were several reports pointing to the opposite. Among them, 2 retired NSA agents said that they had eavesdropped on a conversation, making them think that the crash was no accident. So, what are the theories around Hammarskjöld's death? Was his plane shot down or sabotaged to prevent him from reaching his destination and engaging in negotiations during the Congo Crisis? The Soviets did it. During the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union were engaged in a global ideological struggle. The Congo Crisis, which Hammarskjöld was deeply involved in, was a proxy conflict with both Western and Soviet interests at play. This theory argues that Hammarskjöld's independent and non-aligned approach to diplomacy might have been perceived as a challenge to Soviet interests, particularly in Africa, and thus the Soviet Union may have had motives to get rid of him. They were upset that Hammarskjöld sent 20,000 UN troops to Congo and refused to let them come under the control of the elected government there. The United Nations was a forum for diplomatic efforts and negotiations during the Cold War. Disrupting the leadership of the UN by removing Hammarskjöld could have been seen as advantageous for the Soviets, potentially allowing them to influence the organization more to their liking. With the Soviet Union's history of assassinations and removal of leaders that opposed them, this is certainly a possibility. The Belgians and the corporate powers did it. Over the years, there have been claims that powerful corporate interests had significant influence over Western governments, including intelligence agencies. Congo was rich in natural resources, including minerals like copper, cobalt, and diamonds. Mining companies, many of which were based in Western countries, and especially in Belgium, had substantial investments in the region. Their very lucrative mines would have come under threat because Hammarskjöld supported the Congolese government's attempts to nationalize certain industries, including mining. This move was viewed with shock and fear by multinational corporations that now stood to lose their profitable companies. And with their financial and political power in the region, these people could of course have done it. They did have the means, the motive, and the opportunity to do it. The African countries did it. In 2011, a Zimbabwe intelligence report document were declassified. These documents contained information suggesting that the plane carrying Hammarskjöld may have been shot down by another aircraft. In support of this, a Belgian pilot, Jan van Rissegem, claimed he was involved and was flying a plane to divert Hammarskjöld's plane, and it had gone wrong and crashed. Not only that, Rissegem had extensive ties to Britain, including a British mother and wife, had trained with the RAF, and was decorated by Britain for his service in the Second World War. There have also been claims that South African intelligence agencies may have played a role in Hammarskjöld's death due to his support for the anti-apartheid movement and his opposition to South Africa's policies. And for those of you that have watched my documentary on the assassination of the Swedish Prime Minister Olof Palme, knows that South Africa has been involved in assassinations of their opponents many times. Western intelligence did it. This theory implies the involvement of foreign governments or intelligence agencies, where Western intelligence, particularly the CIA and MI6, may have been involved in Hammarskjöld's death. The CIA director Alan Dulles did say that Hammarskjöld had become a problem, and taking this in the context of the U.S. covert programs like MK Ultra and all the assassinations they committed during the 50s and 60s, it's absolutely plausible that Western powers had him eliminated. Proponents of this theory suggest that his support for decolonization, anti-apartheid efforts, and his role in mediating conflicts in the developing world was viewed as a threat to Western interests in the region. During Hammarskjöld's tenure as UN Secretary General, it's known that the CIA and other intelligence agencies closely monitored his activities and communications. His efforts to maintain neutrality and work with non-aligned nations, and suggesting nationalization of African resources, could have been perceived as a challenge to Western interests, making him a potential target for covert operations. These agencies might have been directly or indirectly involved, or may have had knowledge of a plot to kill Hammarskjöld, just like Harry Truman claimed. Following a UN report in 2017, the former Chief Justice of Tanzania, Mohamed Chande Othman, was tasked with further investigations. His first report concluded that an aerial attack on the plane would have been possible using resources existing in the area at the time, and that there is likely to be much relevant material that remains undisclosed. He identified the continued non-disclosure of potentially relevant new information in the intelligence security and defense archives of UN member states as the biggest barrier to understanding the full truth. Othman presented his second report in September 2019. It concluded that there were many more foreign mercenaries in and around Katanga, including pilots, than had been considered by earlier inquiries. They had suitable planes and airfields to enable them to intercept the aircraft approaching Ndola Airport. It remains plausible that an external attack or threat was a cause of the crash. The circumstances of the plane crash and the mystery surrounding it will probably never be solved, and there are too many suspects, so definitive answers to his death remain elusive. But what do you guys think happened? Please leave a comment below about your thoughts about this, and please smash the like and subscribe button. And please check out my other videos to see if there are more you find interesting. And I hope to see you in the next one.